My name is Lindsay Daniel, and the two most important moral questions which emerge out of my topic are: one, does journalism and news broadcasting adhere to moral standards when they participate in media manipulation? And two, is it right or justifiable for news broadcasting companies to consider one's virtues instead of just job qualifications when hiring new news personnel or workers? So now I'll explain the importance of these questions. So my first question is important because the news is something that most of us engage in on a daily basis. Individuals should realize that media manipulation is, quote, planting and or amplifying misinformation and disinforming using humans or digital tools, targeting journalists or public figures for psychological manipulation, according to Data and Society Network in 2020. This type of reporting is said to affect people's reality and construe the reality of what is important and what is not. And as a watcher or reader of the news, the public should be aware of this. The ability to make a newsworthy report depends on the ability to create a story, and this can create an unreliable dependency on the broadcasting system. My second question is important because it is morally responsible to hire someone who is not just qualified, but truly virtuous individuals who have good character. When we listen to the news, I'm sure most people want to believe that individuals working in these large news companies are virtuous people. To be a virtuous person, it is someone who, quote, holds a set of morals and virtues personally and will use them every day, both in and out of work, according to Madison in 2020. These attributes are important when considering hiring employees because these employees will demonstrate these virtues in the work that they produce to the public. In a recent study, the researchers gave people the option to watch the news or change the channel on the TV, and 79.9% chose to watch the news instead of turning off the set. And that was a research study done by Gov in 2020. And this demonstrates the importance of the news to the everyday person. This makes me wonder what news broadcasting companies take into consideration most when hiring workers: job qualifications or the type of virtues the person possesses. Of my two moral questions that I'm focusing on in this video, the moral question that stood out to me the most as controversial is the question: does journalism and news broadcasting adhere to moral standards when they participate in media manipulation? Especially considering the president we have now, which is President Donald Trump, he makes it very known how important the topic of media manipulation is. Because of this, people are really starting to pay attention to the idea of media manipulation and keeping that in mind when they choose what news sources they want to subscribe to. This is controversial now more than ever because people are becoming more aware of media manipulation because of how known our president has made it. And of course, when dealing with politics, it is always controversial because half of the people will agree and the other half of the people will completely disagree, making it controversial. And this is the exact definition of controversial, which is giving rise or likely to give rise to public disagreement. And I found that definition via the dictionary. So now I'll go over both of my moral questions and I'll describe at least two moral theories telling us how to respond to these questions. So when responding to these questions, I'll go over two moral theories that would tell us how to respond to each question. So for my first question, which was again, does journalism and news broadcasting adhere to moral standards when they participate in media manipulation? Um, I would use Kant's moral theory of deontology, and with using this theory, the answer to that question is simply no. The reason for this answer is because to make a news broadcasting or journalism more moral, it would need to conform to Kant's moral law. To do so, these companies would need to have the right motive and follow the rules. Actions from pleasure have no moral worth according to Kant's ideas of moral law and deontology. A person with goodwill does the right thing just because it is the right thing to do. Kant believes that humans are rational beings, so humans are capable of doing the right motive and following the moral law. To understand right from wrong in Kant's moral theory, one can follow the theory of Kantian deontology. Deontology is a theory that uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. This idea states that some actions are prohibited no matter how good the consequences are. This follows the idea that ethical actions follow a universal moral law. This means that people would follow the rules and do what is right. This does not judge actions from their outcomes, but by the situation. This can be difficult because this idea disregards the consequences of our actions. Another moral theory that would help us respond to this question is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on the outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. So, by being honest and not manipulating the news and the media, it is more beneficial for the majority of people listening to the news, which would then allow it to follow the theory of utilitarianism. But by manipulating the media and construing the actual news, it is going against the idea of utilitarianism. Now I'll go over my second question and I'll give you two moral theories that would tell us how to respond to that question. So for my second question that I'm focusing on today, which is again, is it right or justifiable for news broadcasting companies to consider one's virtues instead of just job qualifications when hiring new news personnel or workers? I'll go over two different moral theories that would tell us how to respond to that question. And so first I'll go over virtue ethics and then I'll go over deontology. So for virtue ethics, that's what I'll start off with. I have come to the conclusion that it is important to hire someone that is virtuous. Someone who is virtuous is a major asset to any organization. Having a team of people who possess many different virtues is even more beneficial to a news company. I would expect that a news company employer who values virtuous employees and actively seeks to hire not only qualified individuals, but individuals who possess specific virtues would develop or produce a higher quality of work. Virtues like honesty, fairness, generosity, kindness, and responsibility are all important in ethical news reporting. Different individuals can have different virtues. This leads to a diverse, competitive work environment. The inclusion of a variety of virtues in the workplace is beneficial to everyone that is in that environment. Individuals would get to display their different virtues as well as get to observe different virtues in their coworkers. This leads to a well-rounded, virtuous work environment, which is then reflected in the quality of work that they produce in this company. The deontological answer to this question would be to use rules when hiring someone who is virtuous or not virtuous. So when the company would be hiring a person and they would want that person to have specific virtues, then those would need to be rules within the company's guidelines to obtain hiring virtuous people. So when hiring a virtuous person or choosing the option of not hiring a person you think does not possess specific virtues that you want the company to have, then you would need to follow the specific rules in hiring someone with those specific virtues that would be most beneficial to the companies based on the company's rules. So now for each of my questions that I've chosen, I'm going to go over how a person should respond to these problems in practical situations. So for my first question, a practical activity that the person in this situation should do, and I'll remind you of the question again, which was, does journalism and news broadcasting adhere to moral standards when they participate in media manipulation? And as a response, a person should keep the moral standards in mind when producing content in the media. They should participate in the idea of goodwill, and it will show in the content that they produce. And for my second question, a response, and I'll say the question again one more time, which was, is it right or justifiable for news broadcasting companies to consider one's virtues instead of just job qualifications when hiring new news personnel. Um, when hiring someone of specific virtues, virtue ethics considers an employee's choices and actions, and this focuses on the type of decisions the employee makes. It focuses on if they're a good person as reflected by the type of work and reporting that they do, or acts reckless and selfish. And the idea is that a good person will be a good employee and they will reflect their virtues in their work. And this is important, that a person in the work environment makes this a practical activity when hiring people. Thinking about their specific virtues could be as easy as understanding where they're coming from and the type of person they are when being put in an interview setting and hiring individuals. Overall, the reason that the news companies should do these things, which are hiring virtuous people or not participating in media manipulation, is because it is simply the right thing to do, and the right thing to do is often beneficial for the majority. And using a platform as big as the news, which is reachable to thousands, maybe millions of people, is extremely important because it is having an influence on tons of lives. And from these questions, there are many different moral theories that each individual news company can follow. And by following these moral theories strongly, then that will result in a more beneficial and more effective working environment that is more beneficial for the everyday viewer or watcher or subscriber of the news.